In our final talk on renal homeostasis, we're going to look at glucose homeostasis and the kidney. As usual, we have our diabetic patient who we've been talking about for the entire series, and at the end of this talk we'll see how this ties into glucose homeostasis and the kidney. Again, just to remind us what homeostasis is and the ways in which the kidney may be involved. So here's a 54-year-old diabetic with chronic kidney disease who presents to the emergency department with hypoglycemia. It's his third episode in 3 months. So let's think a little bit about the causes of hypoglycemia in a diabetic, the medication that might predispose to hypoglycemia in patients with CKD, and the role of the kidney in glucose homeostasis. So before we move on, when we're thinking about hypoglycemia in a diabetic, we should categorize this. So it could be due to decreased intake, so people who have changed their diet, certainly who are anorexic, who for one reason or another can't eat as much as they should be and are on their regular medications will go hypoglycemic. Alternatively, people who have a sudden increase in glucose utilization, for example those who have started a new exercise regime, may also find themselves prone to hypoglycemia. Beyond this, hypoglycemia in these patients can be caused by exogenous causes such as their diabetic medication or other exogenous stimulants of hypoglycemia, for example alcohol or other drugs such as pentamidine or quinolones. Endocrine causes are also quite common in the diabetic patient. So diabetic patients who develop hypothyroidism, hypopituitarism, or hypoadrenalism will all be prone to hypoglycemia as well. In terms of the medication predisposing to hypoglycemia, we did touch on that. So oral hypoglycemics, of course, many of them are excreted by the kidney, and in chronic kidney disease will have a prolonged and more profound effect on the patient. But insulin is also a cause of hypoglycemia in the patient with chronic kidney disease, as we will describe as we go on with this talk. So let's now look at the role of the kidney in glucose homeostasis. The kidney has many roles in glucose homeostasis. Remember that nearly all of the glucose in the blood is filtered by the kidney, and in normal patients all is reabsorbed. Just to say that in patients with an impaired insulin response or in diabetic patients, the reabsorption of glucose from the tubules is enhanced, and therefore more glucose is taken back up from the nephron, from the tubules, than in a normal person. So that although they may be spilling glucose in the urine, in fact the reabsorption is enhanced, thus promoting high PER glycemia. The kidney has a very important role in gluconeogenesis, and again in diabetics this role can be enhanced. But importantly, this is also a really important source of glucose in the patient who has gone hypoglycemic. So a patient who has become hypoglycemic, about half of the gluconeogenesis that may occur in response to this comes from the kidney rather than the liver. The kidney takes up glucose for its own use, and therefore may may remove glucose from the circulation in this way. The kidney is important in insulin clearance, so it is important in the excretion of insulin in the diabetic. And of course, it's a major source of glucose metabolism in the body. It gets its energy from glucose, the kidney. What happens in chronic kidney disease? So there is decreased renal gluconeogenesis. As we said, in a hypoglycemic state, about 50% of gluconeogenesis that occurs in response to hypoglycemia comes from the kidney due to catecholamine stimulation. And therefore, in a patient with chronic kidney disease, they're much more likely to become hypoglycemic and have a prolonged period of hypoglycemia because of a lack of this response. Insulin clearance is decreased, and therefore the effects of insulin are both more profound and more prolonged. Interestingly, the uremia caused by chronic kidney disease seems to have an effect on hepatic insulin metabolism. So the breakdown of insulin in the liver is also affected, again leading to a prolonged and more profound impact of insulin on the body because it's not being removed. Various drugs used in diabetes are affected by kidney disease, particularly the sulfonylureas, and there's a decrease in clearance of these drugs, making them more dangerous because they're more likely to cause profound and prolonged hypoglycemia. And finally, we just know that patients with microalbuminuria, diabetics with microalbuminuria, seem more prone to hypoglycemia, although the mechanism of this is not very well known. So therefore, as you can see, there are lots of reasons why the patient with chronic kidney disease may be hypoglycemic. So for one last time, let's go back to our 64-year-old diabetic with diabetic ketoacidosis. As we said, the diabetic patient has an enhanced reabsorption of glucose from the tubules, and also can promote a greater production of glucose through gluconeogenesis in the absence of insulin regulation. So in the diabetic patient who does not have serious kidney disease, in fact, there is a more prolonged and enhanced high PER glycemic effect in the kidney, both in relation to intestinal load of glucose and in relation to any changes in glucose concentration in the body. Even in the high PER glycemic state, more glucose is absorbed from the tubules in a diabetic patient. So for all these reasons, patients with insulin resistance tend to have higher glucose levels for many reasons as well, but the kidney contributes to that. So if you have any questions, you can bring them up in class. So this is the end of our short series on renal homeostasis, and we looked at the way the kidney regulates the balance of fluid and electrolytes, acid-base status, and carbohydrate and glucose metabolism. I hope you found this series useful. As we said, if you have any questions or comments, you can bring them up in class. Thank you.